Alrighty, good morning everyone and welcome to another Security Compass webinar. Today's webinar topic is Build a Sustainable e-learning program that delivers value. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Raquel Rodriguez, the events manager here at Security Compass and your host for today's webinar. Before we get started with the actual content, I'd like to give you a quick overview of Security Compass. For those of you who may not be aware of us until today, Security Compass was founded in 2004 and began with a team of experienced penetration testers. Today, we have come far and work with many large enterprises globally to manage their cybersecurity risk through balanced development automation. We have three key offerings. Our flagship product, SD Elements, enables organizations to deliver software quickly and reduce costs through automation. Our modular role-based e-learning solutions empower organizations to embrace DevSecOps, and our strategic advisory services offer expertise in cloud security, pen testing, and red teaming for a better security posture. Let's quickly go through some housekeeping items. As you might notice, you've all entered the session on mute to reduce background noise. Second, a recording of this webinar will be available after today's event. You will receive an email with a link to the recording, and we will also be publishing this recording in the resources section of our website. Also, we encourage everyone to raise questions. To do so, please submit your questions into the Q&A chat, and we'll address them during our Q&A session. Lastly, if you would like to follow up with us or you have a topic you'd like to see covered in a future webinar, please email us at contact@securitycompass.com. For today's webinar, we're going to take a close look at building a sustainable e-learning program that delivers value. I'm pleased to have here with me Altaz Villani, Director of Insights Research, and our guest speaker for today is Caroline Gray, Principal at Gray Learning Alliance. Caroline and Altaz, thank you so much for being here with me today. I know our audience is looking forward to hearing your presentation, so I'll let you take it from here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raquel. Appreciate that. And it's always a pleasure to have a discussion with Caroline, one of the leading voices in the industry around e-learning. Thank you very much again for joining us today, Caroline.
My pleasure, Altaz.
Wonderful. Let's just spin up a whiteboard over here and see what we can do to get our discussion going forward here. So, Caroline, when it comes to dealing with e-learning, we see a lot of discussion around e-learning, and I'd like to keep the discussion really focused on where we could use e-learning to add value from a business context. But before we even get to that stage, I think let's take a step back, and from your experience, can you help us understand what works when we talk about e-learning? Are there certain principles that you think apply across the board?
Yes. Shall we move on? No. Yes, I think that there are certain principles that always apply with e-learning, with any kind of learning. There are some that are unique to e-learning, but certainly the general principles around how people learn, they don't change. They haven't changed, whether that be classroom, e-learning, synchronous, e-learning, asynchronous. I'd say that we still have to remember that if you have something you're going to learn, you have to be motivated in order to learn it. That's a principle that doesn't change. You have to have the context within which the information is going to be appropriate. And so you can understand how you could use that information or it fits in with something you have to do. That's something that definitely doesn't change. And you have to have it consumable in a way that you can go away and reflect on it and then have an opportunity to apply it in order to really have it become something that sticks. Mm-hmm. So I'd say those are a few of the principles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And when we take a look at the motivation, the context, and the ability to make this consumable, we oftentimes find that there are a lot of learning initiatives that we take a look at that are created. And I'm wondering, at the end of the day, when we look at trying to measure the success of this, Do you find that metrics are a key part of making sure that when we look at whether or not a given program is working, that should be in fact built into the model within this context that you've just described to us? And we'll get to the metrics later, but I'd like to know, are we on the right track when we talk about things like e-learning metrics?
Absolutely. I always would approach the development of e-learning initiatives from the perspective of what it is that is the measure by which it will be considered successful. Mm-hmm. And an example of that would be if you, for instance, are looking at improving the service level of call centers, you would be checking what is the current measure of how their successes occurs. Is it a reduction in the number of people that customers have to go through? Do they have to get a call, so many calls through, and the throughput improves, et cetera? And when you have that basis, you have the basis upon which you're going to actually determine what content is going to be appropriate. And then you get into the issues of the tactics by which you'll teach it.
Yeah, interesting. So while we're still in the early stages of our discussion today, I think, Raquel, if you could just kind of throw up that first poll that we've got, let's try and find out from the folks that are out there, you know, when you look at your target level audience today for your e-learning program, and you may have more than one projects on the go right now, can you give us an understanding? Do you generally approach this with the junior levels? Is it the intermediate, senior levels? Is it kind of a combination of one or the other? Where do you kind of see your e-learning program? And it may be that you are creating the program or you're participating in a given program. It would be interesting to try and get a sense kind of where this fits, because the approach that we take might in fact be different depending on the levels that we're trying to target, you know, from that perspective. So Caroline, while we're waiting for folks to kind of fill this out, you know, have you, from your experience, have you found that the tactics when we approach the different levels of audience tend to vary over you know, over the sort of the techniques that we're going to use, the methodologies, or do you find that irrespective of the level that we're targeting, it's pretty much going to be the same kind of techniques that we would use? What's different as we approach different groups?
Well, that's a good question, I think, and it is very relevant to e-learning, particularly because you used to have the presumption that e-learning was just something that it was cost effective and you could therefore provide training to a large group of people, and it would be usually your more junior employees. Mm-hmm. And then for senior people, they would have a classroom or they would have some sort of group get together that would be more personal, give them an opportunity to ask lots of questions, where it wouldn't be embarrassing if they didn't know things, etc. So the approach, I think, with e-learning that you see that works quite successfully with senior people that I've seen work very well is where you have the opportunity to simulate a task you have to do. And that ties in with the kind of skills that you're probably trying to develop at a senior level, which is very interdependent competencies regarding complex decision-making, the people involved, how you approach a problem. So general judgmentals and analytic skills. So that is usually something that they find valuable and that they need. And it also is helpful to have it be more social so that they have an opportunity to talk with colleagues as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so if we can just kind of put up the results of that poll that we see there, Raquel, you know, we find that, you know, most of the people here really focus in on that intermediate level. So you talked, Caroline, about a classroom-based approach. You talked about simulations for complex decisions and analytics, and there's a social aspect to this as well. And you also described something that is like, go up to a web browser, you've got something frame-based, where you're looking at content, something that people would just basically review, and we would use that perhaps to try and train people who are new to their roles and try and bring them up. When we see this kind of intermediate level audience that's kind of in between mid-level managers, directors, program managers, people in that sort of space, and even from a technology perspective, those that are advanced, in terms of their, let's say, technical capabilities. What might be a reasonable approach that you've seen from the different targeted approaches that you've experienced? Combination of these things, one works better than the other?
Well, I'd say in terms of managers, you generally want to put them in a position where they feel confident in, say, if it's a new initiative of some kind, that they themselves have a good handle on it, so that they have an overview of the business context and how that's going to work out, how it might affect their own measures of success, and what sort of organizational objectives. So it's an overview at a different level of what it is that they're going to be required to do that's new. And it usually, I would say, is it's very welcome if it's a combination of how this is going to affect current practice, and how much of the time that's allocated to whatever it is that's coming in that's new is going to be have to be reframing of the current job that you've got, that kind of thing.
Right.
Organizational concerns.
So tell me about how we communicate these results now, because in the discussions that I've been having, many times people struggle with trying to have e-learning, the value of e-learning get communicated effectively. So making sure that these results are communicated effectively, what's worked from your experience?
It's important, I think, for the e-learning program to have a good deal of visibility when it starts. And the way that that works is that it is a program that has the stamp of approval from a fairly high level of management. You've got senior management that has indicated this is a priority, and they will attach some measures to it, how it fits in with the organizational goals for the year, how it will affect overall the direction the company wants to go. And so that really makes a big difference as to whether it's going to be successful or not, because you can count on that channel then as being one that everybody will get in terms of communication, that this is an important part of the organization's work this year. And that is always a good thing for the program, both in terms of resources you're going to be able to apply to it, and then how you can channel the results as well, because people then will be interested in seeing how the overall performance of people from the program is going to be communicated back to senior management.
Interesting. And are you able to share what are some of the kinds of results that get communicated when we look at some of the metrics, some of these things that from a business standpoint make sense, and how do we like just being able to extract that information from an e-learning program and present that to senior stakeholders? What are some of these things that we should be measuring to gauge this effectiveness? Because it seems to be an ambiguous approach, and I'm not sure that everyone is clear on how we might be able to communicate this.
Right. So I mean, there is a translation effort that's required often between, say, if you have a business objective that is, we want to grow revenue, and that's the goal. You've got a choice there. Presumably, if a lot of ways you're going to accomplish that. You could put into campaign. You could try and improve how your salespeople operate in terms of getting a greater share of wallet, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those will be learning attached to learning, and some of them won't. But for instance, if it's related to performance, then you probably are going to have something that you can apply an e-learning program to. And an example of that would be, so if you go back to in the call center, you want to improve that, your performance of your call center people, you would have a goal that would be attached to the performance objective, say, of an increase in revenue per person of 2%, just numbers made up. So then what you would have then is a communication of that, and a commitment obviously from the business that that's appropriate, will meet their targets, and then you come up with the tactics by which that is going to be accomplished, and you start from there. So in other words, you are aligned from the beginning with the business goal. And there are many types of business goals. Another example would be, for instance, a healthcare company. The US healthcare situation has been a time of great struggle for a lot of healthcare companies because of all of the disagreement about the legislation and the fact that now you have a lot of issues with pre-existing conditions and a pandemic. And so what the goal might be for that organization is to simply come up with a better way of dealing with all of the new requirements on people and people's performance in a time when there is a tremendous amount of stuff coming at them. Mm-hmm. And so that would be a business goal, which is to better enable people, staff, to be able to meet the challenges of the environment. And for instance, there was a particular healthcare company, it's called Humana, and the approach that they took was to meet the business objectives in terms of performance. They thought they would expand e-learning in terms of using, it's an LMS system called River. And what that does is enable social learning so that everybody would learn from each other, that would be monitored with mentoring as well, and communication throughout the organization. But basically, it was an attempt to leverage the collaborative culture that they did have with new people coming in, and creating a means by which information could spread faster and people could learn on the job better.
Interesting. Raquel, if we could put up that second poll now, and while this poll is getting filled out, Caroline, I'd like to talk a little bit about culture at this point. From the cultural perspective, you talked about how it plays an important part in sort of helping from an e-learning perspective. Is there a cultural change that is required as part of e-learning? Have we been missing this and thinking that within the same culture, we would simply go and, drop an e-learning program and everybody would be able to take it? Like, is there something we're missing here in terms of the change management aspect of e-learning as well?
Well, for a company that hasn't had e-learning, yes. Although at this point, I would doubt that there's any company that hasn't had any e-learning. Obviously, there are exceptions. However, I do think that culture is a very important part of whether it is a successful experience or not. What really you will have the least success with is in an organization where you have an expectation still that training is all top down, and you go in and take a course, and you only take those courses that are deemed to be what the training department says you have to take. There isn't self-direction. There isn't necessarily the culture of network-based learning. It's more hierarchical. So that's the culture that needs to be addressed for learning to be successful. It is that it have a degree of resources available to people that are e-learning based, that are not necessarily going to be assigned to you, but you have them available as resources. In addition to, there might be some that are assigned to you as well. You begin to look at that more as aids in which you can have to do your job.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So culture has a big part to sort of play in that as well.
Yeah.
It looks like my the whiteboard is actually just dropped off the network, so I apologize to the audience for that. But we're going to keep this conversation moving, Caroline, and just take a look at the polls that we've got here. So a lot of folks tend to use web-based e-learning. There's some just-in-time stuff that's going on. Not a lot in terms of hybrid classroom. And of course, that's, these days with the pandemic, that may be playing a part in this as well. It's pretty common, at least in my experience, to have people do a lot of web-based e-learning that's happening today. Within the web-based e-learning paradigm, the fact that we can go in there and collect these metrics easily is something I think that's an important part of making sure that, people are adhering to the personal objectives that we have. And I'm just sort of wondering as well, when you think about the jobs and the tasks and the skills. So you very clearly articulated, Caroline, that we've got organizational objectives and then we've got personal objectives, and we need to have an alignment between these two. And when we start to take a look at the different ways that we could go and we can approach this alignment, how we might be able to achieve that, you had described how we might have a classroom-based or a web-based or different techniques to do this. And I'm wondering, is there something in there that would give us some kind of an indication of which approach might be better than another? Like you'd mentioned, for example, simulations would be good for complex decision-making, analytics, and social. What would a web-based training, or what would a simulation-based training, in terms of not the executives, but people who are executing on a day-to-day basis, when would those kinds of things be useful for them? Any thoughts on that you could offer us?
Yeah, I think that is web-based training. You've got a pretty broad range of tutorial-based, simulation-based, and if the problem with simulations is oftentimes their expense, you can reduce the expense by having it more job related and procedurally based, so that you have the opportunity to get knowledge that's very close to what you actually have to do on the job. So you have a new security procedure, you have e-learning, and it says, here's what you do, that you have to do it with. And you also have the opportunity with e-learning to relate that to the I guess, the organizational message that you want to deliver around security procedures, such as the consequences of not doing those things, and as well as the opportunities that doing those things will provide the organizational. So you can combine procedures and promotional kinds of messages with e-learning, and give people a chance to practice, which is one of the things that I think is often not perhaps sufficiently appreciated, is the unique opportunities that e-learning affords for people to practice what they have to do. And particularly where it is something that requires some degree of skill, which they may not have initially. They don't want to be embarrassed in front of their peers in a classroom. They have the opportunity to go back and work on something until they are comfortable with it. And other people don't know, how many times, and their results necessarily wouldn't be communicated to their manager, say, from the number of times it took them. So there is, these are good ways in which to make people feel comfortable with the things they have to do, and give them the reasons that they have to do them in a way that motivates them to do them.
Right, in the right way. Got it. Give me a moment. I'm going to try and see if I can really quickly spin up the whiteboard once again so we can
Sure.
share that with folks as well. So you brought up some really interesting points here, Caroline, looking at how we could go and you know, on the one hand, we want people to feel that, you know, when they learn, that it is something that is going to be useful for them. It aligns with the organizational objectives. They feel that it's a safe place to go in there and to learn. Sometimes if that's not the case, then it's really difficult to try and get a good e-learning program in place. There's a bit of like some science behind this, Caroline. And I know that you've done a lot of research in this space. I mean, you've done stuff in the industry. You've helped push us forward when it comes to e-learning and injecting some science behind this.
Mhm.
Can you share what you found when it comes to adult learning and it comes to e-learning and sort of the science behind this? What have you discovered, you know, from your experience that has worked really well, that maybe are things that are not commonly known, that, you know, I don't think a lot of people are approaching this from a scientific perspective as well, but there's a, you know, I don't want to go too far. I want you to kind of just, you know, give us some thoughts around the science behind e-learning.
Right. So going back to the topic of learning and how it applies in what I'd mentioned initially was that there was some unique aspects that e-learning brings to the table. And that obviously is one in which you have, you don't have a person in front of you. You have, you're interacting with material that is in the form of content. So it's somewhat free of a person. And you have a lot of, as a result, focus in e-learning on how you design the content and what's going to be the way that it can be best customized and prepared so that people can absorb it in the best way. You have to think about things like cognitive load. So what is cognitive load? And it's something that applies both to the appearance of the e-learning, like how much you have on a frame. Does it have conflicting graphics and text? Does it have too much information so that people come away from it and they can't remember? There's too much there to remember. You can have e-learning that doesn't provide the opportunities. It's just an opportunity to see information and move on. And you don't get to look at the consequence of it, of how working with it works, how you have, so to actually absorb the information and then be able to apply it in some way that's meaningful. So that is how you have to look at breaking down the science of instruction when e-learning. And the good news is there is a lot more attention paid to it in good e-learning, so that you in fact have often quite superior learning experiences that are created compared to classroom, which often can be just slides and people looking at it and writing down things they say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let me push a little bit further on this. Is it that in some sense the graphics and the movement that we see on there, for the sake of just having it, is not in fact the approach we should be taking? There has to be some methodology to this. Are we creating this for the greatest absorption? Are we creating this with the intent that we're going to minimize this cognitive load? You know, so we might have something that's very simple, but actually quite effective, and something that could be very rich and could be a full-blown simulation, but it's an overload because there's so much information coming in that it might be difficult for the learner to actually absorb this. Is that an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement. And I'll give you an example actually of where I did work in a company where they were very concerned that people who were receiving the e-learning think of it highly and see it as valuable. And so they said, it's got to have all the bells and whistles. And bells and whistles include fancy graphics and animation and these kinds of things. But that is poor instructional design, experience design, and you will not get retention of information from it. You will get a pleasant experience, and that is about as far as it will go. You will remember that, you know, must have cost a lot of money maybe to make, but again, is that the message that you were trying to get across? The thing to remember always with the effectiveness of a program is the learner. It's not the maker of the program so much. It is, what is it that the learner is going to get from it? Yeah, because it's the learner who's got to go away and do something with it. So if you look at everything from the learner perspective, you have a much better place from which to say, what is going to benefit them? Is it going to be at this time that we've given them information and now we have to make sure they understand the next step with it, either to deal with it in a more complex situation? You know, are we able to provide them feedback so that they understand that they've either grasped it or they haven't grasped it? You know, are we able to give them an opportunity to think about it, or work with somebody on it and then come back and give us a sense of where they've gone? So that you have to remember that learning is a journey. It always is, and it's a journey undertaken by the person who's going through it. It's not the teacher's journey. So what you're trying to enable is that learning journey through the materials you're providing. And it can be very effective. It's not the classroom, it can't be effective, but we actually are much more able to see the effectiveness of e-learning in when it's done the right way, because of the metrics we get.
Yeah, interesting. So when you talk about learning as a journey, some of the discussions that I have center around the creation of a program that's got multiple tiers in it. And, you know, you start here, and some, you know, some organizations will have like different belts that you can achieve. Some have different awards that you can get depending on how far you go. Is this an effective mechanism, you know, when we take a look at it from the learner's perspective, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they're retaining the knowledge and they're able to behave accordingly based on what they've now acquired as new information, new knowledge? You know, this tiered approach, this gamification, is this an effective approach?
Well, I think in some ways it is, as long as the person doesn't just see the interest being to jump up the tiers. In other words, to progress for the purpose of getting stars or a certification. The purpose is to actually deepen the learning. And even if you are most interested in the star, you actually, if it's effective e-learning, are going to be able to learn more if it is designed correctly. And what I'm thinking about is, I mean, you have stages of learning. You have, when you are learning a new task, you start off with basic information and you move on to the ability to build on that and get and understand more complex information from it, and to be able to apply it in more complex and different situations. So it is that kind of a journey of complexity. And if there is a task that's fun, like gamification, that indicates that you've grasped the basic level and you can then get your star for having the basic stuff, it does increase confidence and it also provides motivation. So you can go to the next level and learn more about complexity and like that. And I think it can be quite effective, again, as long as the applicability of what you're doing to get the star really is to the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. So it isn't about just looking at you know, how you might get ahead in terms of just playing a regular game, but it is really, am I acquiring this, and is the And this is where the metrics would come in. Am I actually noticing that there is a difference, and hence the value of a particular program, whether it's got gamification in it or not, in terms of how we can move this. Let me put a slightly different context now. We are operating in a world today where the business models themselves are shifting. We're moving very quickly. There are disruptions happening all over the place. Some organizations are thinking about going digital at this point. In fact, I think pretty much everyone is thinking about that today. We've got focus on certainly within our industry, looking at security and what role security can play in helping us develop applications and software and secure our data more effectively. And I'm just wondering, in this era of all this kind of change that's going on, how are we able to go in there and keep up with all of the necessary learning that needs to happen? Is there something that would almost be like a para-learning kind of approach, like mentorship or something like that? Does that go hand in hand with e-learning? Does it not? What are your thoughts on that? And I know it touches a bit on culture, but I'd like to get your perspective on mentorship and e-learning and sort of the connection between the two.
Right. So first of all, I'd say I think that mentorship is always a good idea, really, whether it's with e-learning or apprenticeship types of things that people do. It's I think that works very well in a culture, and can help achieve business goals. But basically, the ability to do something is the responsibility of the individual, and that individual has to acquire the skills to do it in a way that the organization is going to provide them with, or they understand what they have to get on their own. So I would say that you have, in times of great accelerated change, the only way that you are going to be successful in acquiring skills, lots of different skills, because things are changing so much quickly, is to broaden the way that you approach learning, and to use all your resources that are available as an individual, and as if you're in the area of teaching people, all the tools that you suggest people use. So for instance, the more you can embed the explanations of how you do a task in, better, so that you can have tutorials at touch points. Say if you've got a banking system and you have to do a particular step in the banking process, to have the information on how you complete that process accessible to you right at that time is critical. And you could, if you have systems where you can embed it, you're going to be able to get to market quicker than otherwise, because you don't have to then integrate the work. And you only have to have a limited amount of training that gives you the basics, the overall picture, and then depend upon embedded tutorials for that kind of very detailed information. Job aids, mentors, social networks that can be used, all of those things are really important when you've got a lot of change coming at you. But all of them, I'd say, need to be harnessed within that idea of this is going to be measured. And you don't have to measure every single activity, but it's the overall effort, like how are we doing? We have to be able to define senior management how this is going. And therefore you have to assess people's progress and have to come up with a strategy to do that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And this being separate from the blended learning approaches that we typically see, right? This is actually looking at it from a learner-centric perspective, their journey. Blended learning would be more like, we're going to offer you something that's in class as well as something that's, a digital form of that. But this here, you're talking about something where you've essentially taken it one step further. and trying to take a look and see what are the different techniques that we can use even after you've gone through, let's say, a particular course. Now, what can I do with this to continue to make sure that that retention is there? And so you've got regular touch points across the board so that we are in fact making sure that the change that we would like to see is in fact kicking in. Am I correct in my understanding of what you just said?
I think you're correct, but I would say that the kind of independent ability to attach these touch points to learning that's been provided by L&D would be very dependent upon the level at which somebody is working. Engineers figure out things for themselves a lot. Not everybody is an engineer. And where I think that L&D has to retain reins, as it were, in terms of the kinds of resources that are offered and expectations around them is basically where you have groups of and teams who don't have that capability to be so self-directed. So they still, I think expectations should be set as to what they do with the information and the goal of where it's going, and then they can be assessed as well.
Yeah, interesting. Hold that thought on self-directed learning because I want to do a deep dive on that. Raquel, if we can put up our last poll, let's try and understand how folks are in terms of being able to align this to the business value. So Caroline, while folks are filling out this poll here, from your perspective now, this whole idea of self-directed learning today, on the one hand, we see there's an approach where it's about you do this first, then you do this next, and this is the learning you need to do. Whereas there's a self-directed model that is becoming quite prevalent. To go in and I get to choose where it is that I want to go and invest my time in things. Talk a little bit about this culture of self-directed learning. What do you mean by that?
Right, and I think that's an excellent point, really, Altaz, because there are a number of platforms that come at learning in organizations solely from the perspective of what is it that the individual wants to learn, and then provides a daily feed courses on those things. I do have a problem with being able to say that that is necessarily going to ensure business value to the program. I mean, you could argue that perhaps because this is an important perk for a lot of individuals that they get to learn and grow in their own careers, that you are increasing retention of your people by offering them something like that, and that's important. However, if the business specifically wants there to be progress in a certain area and is counting on a shift in performance in order for that to occur, then it's not necessarily going to meet those goals. So you still have to direct. You have to balance bottom up, I think, and top down. You want to encourage by your hiring, by the messages, people to be self-directed in their learning and to move forward. You also have to encourage them to really understand what the business has in mind. And you should, figure that out and not wait for somebody to tell you necessarily. If you don't know how the work that you're doing is going to help the business or impact the business, then you should make it your business to find out.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And how might one go about trying to figure out what role e-learning can play in the business? Is it about talking to the managers? Is it trying to get a voice with the senior managers to try to understand, kind of what they're thinking about? Because I've also heard in many cases that the very people who are supposed to know where we're headed, sometimes it's unclear to them, right? So if we're trying to latch onto something that is already ambiguous as it is there an opportunity here for someone who is trying to craft an e-learning program or a strategy to suggest, hey, look, here's an opportunity for us to go in and do something that would make us more competitive in the midst of some ambiguity on where even the vision or the roadmap for where the organization is going? Is it possible to do that?
Well, I think that there's a risk in doing it, because then you are in the position of saying, okay, the success measure will be one you come up with. So you are, not, in fact, you're not the business. You don't have that responsibility. So that is a problem. I hear what you're saying and understand, in a situation of ambiguity, rather than do nothing, it would be, you could try and sell it as an opportunity, but I don't think that that is probably the best way to put one's energy. I believe it's important for people in L&D to gain the business skills so they can have conversations about what would be the goal, ideally, and then try and get that to be quantified in some way, and to look at steps that are being used elsewhere in the business that L&D can link into to help achieve these goals. And from that to, extract some quantified metrics that can be applied to a program.
I like it. I like it, Caroline. Ultimately, when you go in and look at the value that needs to be provided, it has to come in from the business side. We can provide some things from the training side to talk about disruptive technologies and how we might be able to do things more effectively. But ultimately, if we are trying to cast what that vision needs to be, then it's very, very shaky. And you start taking on responsibility and accountability for things that are going to be outside the bounds of what you should be looking at. And it's very, very difficult to justify that. And I find many times that, and this sort of gets into the area of risk now, right? The risk is overextended for the program, where it's like almost, okay, if you think we're going to do this now, is that a guarantee we're going to deliver this on the business side? And you start to enter into things that are, not as firm, foundationally. So that's a separate topic. And I think it's really important to bring out as well that when we take a look at these things, it's not about going in there and trying to tell the business what to do. It's in fact going in there and trying to support where the business is headed. And if there's some ambiguity, then there's a facilitation role that can be placed to say, okay, hold on, can we all just sit down together? Where are we headed? What are we trying to achieve, right? That kind of thing can happen. And from there, you derive a program and a set of activities that give you your current state, your future state, what you need to do. And that's your strat plan. And within that, we've got e-learning that kind of fits in and helps us move forward now.
Right.
Sorry.
The only thing I'd add to that, I think, is the issue of that learning is not an event only either, that needs to be gotten across. And that's I think an important aspect of the discussion about self-directed learning is that the learning really should be part of the cultural ethos, and that you have always the need to learn new things. So yes, it's faster these days and more complicated, but senior management needs to understand that the one event is never really, the scope of what they should be thinking about. They should be thinking about how are we going to achieve this goal if it's got a lot of important performance implications in order to achieve that goal. We've got to be working with L&D to ensure that we understand how we're going to get there. What are their plans, and what can they do, and to focus the discussion with senior management in that kind of way as well. So it's not a, jumping in, okay, we got a big problem with lots of changes here and you want me to do a course, or I think I could do a course. It's got to be within a context that says, we've got, here are the skills of our people, here's where we'd have to supplement, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question here. So we've got, on the left-hand side here, a set of key success factors, right? So assume we've got approval from the execs. Assume we've got alignment with organizational objectives. We've got the performance metrics. We have a healthy culture now. What is it that people need to be aware of where this could fail in the last mile, right? Where in the execution does it sometimes fall? Is it about the lack of truly understanding the learner themselves or the different personas of learners? What's missing in there sometimes, when we've got the alignment, we're trying to get a program through, but we're just not seeing the take up. Why?
Right. Well, I think that one thing we haven't talked about, which it might seem not to be you know, a key business of e-learning or learning, but it is communication that has to occur regarding what has been achieved. That's the key, I think, in terms of it's the idea that once, you know, you might have it aligned with business objectives, you don't hit your targets. Why don't you hit your targets? You know, you got to have a culture where you can say, we didn't hit our targets and here's why, and here's what we're going to do to change it. So you have to have, I'd say, open, frank communication about what did work up to now, what didn't, why, and what we have learned from that, and what is the reason that we want to go in this direction. This helps in terms of resources and gives a more scientific basis for direction as well. You have some evidence that is organizationally based. So it's important to build that kind of culture as well, where there is the expectation of those discussions about, and that's more, you know, when we talk about the science of e-learning, it is, you know, one where you have to have some practice, you have some prototypes, some things work, some don't, and the expectation that, you know, failure is not always, you know, not an option. You got to learn how to build it into the practice so that you can do better.
Yeah, and oftentimes if we go through and we've looked at the training, we oftentimes will surface through the training and the metrics and as we start to monitor this, that there may be something else that's broken. And what the e-learning will do is it will surface what else is broken, right?
Yeah.
We may have, for example, conflicting policies. So e-learning doesn't create the policies, but if we've got one training that says this, we've got something else that says that, now we have a collision and it comes out and we're starting to see the metrics on one or the other aren't being met. And it's like, why is this actually happening? And we begin to look at deeper and we find out, hold on a second, we've got conflicting policies here, right? What do we now need to do to help manage this? You know, and that in effect is helping to streamline even the business processes and things that are really important from a business standpoint. And that's also part of the value that kind of brings in. And so e-learning becomes instrumentation into the day-to-day work that is in fact happening.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's great. So I think at this point, Raquel, I'd like to turn it over to you and let's talk a little bit about any questions that are there, anything that you feel that we should bring up as well.
So thank you so much again for a great webinar. At this point, we would like to open it up to questions. If you haven't had a chance to submit your questions, please do so now through the Q&A chat. We had a few questions that did come in and some comments. The first question here is, who owns the accountability for an e-learning program that is supposed to deliver business value?
Who owns the accountability? Caroline, you want to take that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, it belongs to the people who create it. If they have agreed that with that they can do it. I mean, that's the only place it really can belong.
Yeah. Is there a particular business unit that sometimes owns this? Is it someone in operations? Is it someone, you know, that fits in, that has a specific L&D department or business unit that is responsible for this? What have you typically seen? Are there different structures that work?
Yes. I mean, and that does change the mechanics of how it works, but I would definitely say, I mean, L&D is the one who is saying we've got the expertise to teach people stuff. So you give me the content and we'll make sure they understand it. They give you the wrong content, that is not necessarily your problem. If you don't come up with tests that actually test the right things, that's your problem. If you don't, you know, give anyway, so you are responsible for the learning results, and if it has been agreed that there's business metrics applied, you are responsible for making sure that that is clear how it's doing against those metrics.
Right, makes sense. Okay. Raquel?
Perfect. So the next question that we have here is, how can I convince my executive to fund an e-learning program?
Okay, so this goes way to the beginning. If we have an idea of a particular e-learning program that we want to initiate, and we need to convince an executive that this is going to be important in the midst of all the other portfolios, of projects that are on the go and programs that are on the go. How do we get learning injected in there? I'll offer some thoughts, and then Caroline, I'd love to have you kind of jump in and offer your thoughts as well. To me, ultimately, this is going to be a question of business value. So it is a business case that needs to be made to show how e-learning can in fact provide tangible value. Now, my assumption here is e-learning is not even on the radar, right? So you're going at the very beginning and you're trying to make a case to convince an executive. Why should budget be taken away from some other program and put into an e-learning program? To go in there and to talk about what are the risks, to talk about what are the metrics that are going to get measured, what are the real challenges that we have today, and how is learning going to help us address those specific challenges. So for example, let's say in a cybersecurity context, we've got secure coding problems. We could go in and we can train people and get them to go on courses, but it could be quite disruptive. But if we set up an e-learning program that not only gets them down the path efficiently, but also reinforces that through things like job aids and cheat sheets and continual, reinforcement messaging, then we can go in and look at ways that we can help the business achieve what they want ultimately around, let's say, cyber resiliency. But that's the kind of approach that I would suggest. Caroline, your thoughts? Agree, disagree?
Yeah, well, I'd say if it's in fact an organization that has not done e-learning, and it's the first one they would fund, what the metrics that you could use and that everybody did use at the beginning of e-learning were the reduction in costs with a comparable classroom experience. And that would include travel that doesn't occur, lack of disruption that Altaz described, so you aren't losing working time in the same way, and you can quantify that. So those, and then, if people have to travel, hotel, all of those costs as well, those were the kinds of metrics that were used in the introduction of e-learning. They're used less now because so many people aren't looking at the classroom as a comparison. And I guess that would be the significant issue here. If it's not going to be a classroom alternative, and the issue is, well, why does there need to be learning at all? Then the business value has to be established in terms of what is it that you are trying to do, and how would you do it without learning, and what are the possible costs of having untrained people to do something, and then go at it from that angle.
Raquel?
Awesome. So we have one more quick question here. Simulations seem to be gaining in popularity. Are they really useful?
Caroline?
Well, I love simulations. I think they are one of the best mechanisms for deep learning, because they actually can be used as tests as to whether you have acquired skills. And so they are both very relevant to the job, where it's job skills you're supposed to be displaying. You can show whether you've learned how to display them by having to do tasks that are the result of things that you've learned. So I like them as a test in that way. And I also like them because of the opportunities that they provide along the way to really identify where people don't quite get things right. So you can have a drop-in coach who can point the person in the right direction without having to, you don't have to wait, then you can self-correct. And so they have a lot of very unique opportunities, and I think they're so engaging that you also, you're really addressing the point of a person's motivation. And so the challenge with simulations is to make them close to the job so that you can transfer those skills, and to reduce the cost in a way so that they aren't prohibitive. And those are, if you can make those two things happen, then I think they're excellent vehicles for learning.
Awesome. Well, once again, Caroline and Altaz, thank you for a great session. Just to let everybody here know, we do have some webinars coming up in a few weeks. So if you're interested in attending any of these, please go to the upcoming event and webinar section of our website to sign up. We hope everyone found this presentation insightful. And again, we will be providing a link to the recording of this webinar to everyone here via email. Thank you so much for attending. Stay safe and have a great day.
Thank you, Raquel.